It started on a Wednesday morning. I wasn't snooping. That's what I told myself at least. But the truth is, I had seen something the night before, an expression on his face, when he tucked a slip of paper into that drawer. It wasn't guilt. It was grief. And that was stranger than anything. So after he left for his morning walk, I opened the drawer. There, beneath our tax documents and old utility bills, was a letter. Handwritten. Cream-colored stationery carefully folded, the corners smoothed like it had been read too many times. My hands trembled before I even read the name. But I recognized the handwriting immediately. Laurel. I stared at it for what felt like hours. Laurel had been my best friend, my college roommate, the maid of honor at my wedding. She died in a car accident 3 years after we were married, or so I had believed. The funeral had been small, closed casket. I'd held my husband Henry while he cried. I'd mourned her like a sister. So why was there a letter from her dated last month? I unfolded the paper. It shook in my fingers. The ink was faded but steady. Familiar. My dearest Henry, I dreamed of that trip to the cabin again last night. You were wearing that hideous flannel and I couldn't stop laughing. 33 years and I still remember the way your voice softened in the woods. You always made the silence feel safe. Thank you for your last letter. I read it 3 times. I'm so glad Maggie doesn't suspect a thing. I know how careful you've been. Same time next week, forever, Laurel. I couldn't feel my legs. I sank into his desk chair, rereading the words. She wasn't dead. She was writing to him. They had been in contact for over 30 years. And the worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was that line, I'm so glad Maggie doesn't suspect a thing. They knew I didn't know. They built a world where I was a ghost. A placeholder. An afterthought. I sat there for a long time, the paper cold in my hands. My wedding photo stared back at me from the bookshelf. We looked so young. Henry had his arm around me like I was his whole world. I had believed I was. I was wrong. I put the letter back exactly as I found it, smoothed every edge, closed the drawer, and then I cleaned the kitchen. I poured tea. I smiled at him when he returned home. We discussed the dry cleaner. I asked about his walk. And inside, I burned. I didn't scream. I didn't ask him what it meant. I didn't rip the letter to pieces. Because I wasn't ready to confront the lie. I needed to understand it first. I needed to know if this letter was a one-time mistake, or if it was just one page in a novel that had been written behind my back for 30 years. That night, after he went to sleep, I returned to the drawer. And what I found next, it made the letter look like a prologue. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside Henry, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath, wondering how many nights he had dreamed of her, while I lay just inches away. Every soft exhale felt like a lie. By 3 a.m., I was back in his study. Not just at the drawer, but underneath it, behind it, inside every crack and shadow I had never thought to look. And that's when I saw them. Letters. Dozens. Tied with twine, sorted into bundles. Some were yellowed and curling at the edges. Others were crisp, newer, the ink barely faded. Each one was addressed in the same looping hand, Laurel's. I sat cross-legged on the floor like a child rifling through treasure. Except what I found wasn't treasure, it was rot. The oldest one was dated November 1991, just over a year after her funeral. You said it would only be for a little while, that you needed time, that Maggie would never ask questions. But I miss you so much. Why must loving you come with so much silence? The letters weren't poetic. They weren't romantic in the way novels are. They were worse. They were intimate, routine. They talked about a shared recipe, a time he stopped by just for a moment, mentions of anniversaries, their anniversaries, and the repetition of one chilling phrase, I'm so glad she doesn't know. 30 years. For 30 years, he had walked into our home carrying her words. We had celebrated birthdays, paid bills, survived recessions while he held this secret like a second wedding ring tucked in his chest pocket. I started shaking, not from shock. By then, I had already passed through the gates of disbelief, but from realization. This wasn't infidelity in the traditional sense. He hadn't cheated in the physical way most people measure betrayal. This was something worse. He had emotionally preserved another woman while living with me. He had kept Laurel alive in ways I never even knew to be threatened by. I took one letter with me, the most recent, the one I had first read. I needed something to hold, something tangible to anchor my rage. I stared at the paper under the kitchen light for hours, at the way she curled her Y's, the way she wrote forever, with no comma. A quiet woman's confidence in her place in the world, my world. And Henry. He had encouraged it. Maybe I could have swallowed it all if I'd found just one letter. A desperate message from a ghost refusing to let go. But this was sustained. Intentional. Maintained like a second marriage. At 6:40 a.m., Henry shuffled into the kitchen yawning. I had already made breakfast. Scrambled eggs. Toast. Black coffee just the way he liked. He kissed my temple and I let him. I studied his face the whole time he chewed. Not searching for guilt. Guilt would have meant he was hiding something. No. He wasn't hiding. Not really. He was protecting it. Like a gardener tending to a secret bloom. And I was the hedge. The camouflage. That morning, I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I didn't rip the letters into confetti and throw them in his face. I smiled. Because now I knew. And knowledge, well, it's never quiet. It's a drumbeat. And mine had just begun. I stood in our kitchen that morning watching the man I'd been married to for 33 years sip his coffee like he wasn't built out of secrets. His fingers wrapped around the mug the same way they always had. Left hand tucked beneath the handle, right thumb pressed against the rim. He hummed while he drank. Something low. Familiar. The same hum I used to think meant peace. Now it sounded like mockery. I didn't eat. I couldn't. Every bite would have felt like swallowing betrayal. So I waited for him to leave, same as always out the door with a peck on the cheek, a briefcase in hand and his cardigan hanging off one shoulder. As soon as I heard the car start, I moved. Back to the study. The drawer. The box. I wanted to see how deep it went. It wasn't just one box of letters. There were three. 3 shoeboxes each organized like some cursed archive. Early years. Mid-years. Recent. Neatly labeled in pencil on the underside of the lids. I sat on the floor and pulled out the first box. The earliest letter was dated 1991, 1 year after Laurel's supposed death. 1 year after I had knelt beside her mother at that cold, awkward memorial, holding hands with a woman who'd whispered, "She loved you like a sister Maggie." I'd cried that day. Real tears, honest mourning. And all the while, Henry must have known the truth. Laurel's first letter was shaky, like she hadn't held a pen in months. "It's harder than I thought, Henry. I thought faking my death would free us. I didn't realize it would just imprison us in silence." I froze. Faking her death. That wasn't just betrayal, that was conspiracy. And I wasn't just lied to. I was used as part of a cover-up I never agreed to. I wanted to scream. But instead, I kept reading. The story she told across dozens of pages in her neat script was the story of a woman who had died to escape someone else. She never named him. She only wrote, "You know what he did. And you know I couldn't stay. Couldn't stay where? With whom? With us. With me." Then came the bombshell, subtle buried in a paragraph midway through the third letter. "Do you ever see her look at you and wonder if she knows I don't think she's stupid? You always said she was the observant one." My throat closed. I had been observed. measured, reduced. They had discussed me like I was a footnote in their love story. The more I read, the more I realized Laurel wasn't writing to seduce him or beg him to leave me. She was documenting a shared world, a garden they had grown in secret, watered through ink and silence, and he had written back. I found copies of his letters too, typed, printed on yellowing paper, always signed yours in the spaces between. It made me sick. He wasn't just receiving, he was responding, choosing, cultivating this secret life, not out of guilt, not out of accident, but out of intention. I remembered all the nights I thought he was working late, or writing, or out for a walk. He wasn't the kind of man to have lipstick on his collar or mysterious hotel charges. He was dependable, predictable. That's what made this worse, because this wasn't about lust. It was about loyalty. He was loyal to her, more than he had ever been to me. The next few hours passed in a blur. I read every letter, took pictures with my phone, documented everything. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid he would destroy the evidence if I confronted him. Maybe I needed to know I wasn't going crazy. Maybe I wanted to hold on to the proof that the life I lived was only one of the lives being lived in my house. By late afternoon, I felt hollow. The kind of emptiness that doesn't come from loss but from exposure, like my soul had been turned inside out and left on display. That evening, he came home humming again. He kissed me on the cheek. I didn't flinch. I smiled. I asked how his day was. And then I asked something I never asked before. Do you still write in your journal? He looked surprised. Oh, not really. Just scribbles here and there. I smiled wider. I always liked your writing. He chuckled. That's sweet of you to say. I wanted to say I liked it better when I thought it was mine. Instead, I changed the subject. Pasta or soup? He chose pasta, Laurel's favorite. I knew that now. She mentioned it in half her letters. I boiled the noodles while he read the paper. I served the food while he scrolled on his phone. And all the while I wondered, who was this man? Because if you had asked me just 2 days earlier, I would have said I knew him better than anyone alive. That he was kind, patient, complicated, but good. A man of quiet loyalty. A man who grieved honestly, who never once made me feel second. Now I saw it differently. He had made me feel first so I wouldn't look deeper. And I hated him for it. But more than that, I hated that it had worked. That I had loved him so openly, so completely, while he had partitioned his love, like a house with secret rooms. That night, I dreamed of Laurel. She stood at the edge of our garden holding a letter. She didn't speak. She just looked at me. Not with anger, not with apology, but with pity. And I woke up gasping. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep reading the letters without acting. I couldn't keep pretending. But I also couldn't confront him yet. I needed to see her, Laurel, in the flesh. Because if she had truly faked her death, rebuilt her life, and kept writing to the man I thought was mine, then I needed to understand why. Her name was Laurel, my college roommate, my best friend, my husband's ex-lover. She died in a car accident or so I believed. Even saying her name felt like touching a wound that never fully healed. Laurel Montgomery. Honey blonde hair. A laugh like a songbird. Smart. Magnetic. The kind of woman people remember whether they want to or not. She and Henry had dated briefly before I ever entered the picture. According to them, it ended long before he and I became serious. At least that's what I was told. Back then, Laurel and I were inseparable. We lived in the same dorm, shared everything from clothes to secrets. And even though she had once been with Henry, I didn't feel threatened. It was in the past. She'd told me herself that he was too cautious for her. She wanted someone wilder. She said I'd tamed him. She said she was happy for us. She even helped me pick out my wedding dress. And then 3 years into our marriage, the accident happened. A rainy road. A bridge. A head-on collision with a semi-truck. That's what the obituary said. Henry told me Laurel had died instantly, that he'd spoken to her mother and they'd decided to keep it small, just family. No service, no burial I could attend. I cried for days. I blamed myself for not calling her more often, for drifting apart. I clung to Henry for comfort, believing he'd lost someone precious too. But now all of that felt like theater. Rehearsed. Carefully staged. Because I had just read letters, dozens of them, proving that Laurel hadn't died at all. And that Henry had known. That he had been in contact with her the whole time. From the very year she died. So the question became, why? Why fake her death? Why lie to me? And why keep it going for 3 decades? I dug deeper. I didn't go back to the letters that day. I was afraid I'd become obsessed. I could feel my sanity teetering, dangling above some dangerous edge. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I Googled her. Nothing. No obituary records online. No photos. No alumni updates from our university. It was like she had been erased from the internet. But I remembered her mother's name, Judith Montgomery. She had lived in Vermont back then. A quick search revealed that Judith passed away 15 years ago. No surviving relatives listed. No obituary mention of Laurel. It was like Laurel had vanished. Twice. The next step was riskier. I opened Henry's glove box. He always kept a notebook there. He said it was for directions and grocery lists. I'd never thought to open it before. I flipped through its pages. Amid scribbled notes and reminders for dental appointments was a name: Brightwood Care Center, Room 218, LMLM, Laurel Montgomery. I Googled the facility, a nursing home, just outside of town. Quiet. Private. I knew what I had to do. 2 days later, I got in the car and drove there. I didn't tell Henry I was going out. I didn't need to. I had memorized the visitor hours. I wore sunglasses. A scarf. Not because I expected to be recognized, but because it gave me a layer of separation, a disguise to protect what little control I had left. The receptionist was young and distracted. I signed in under a fake name, Marie Delaney, and said I was there to visit room 218. No questions. The hallways smelled of antiseptic and something fainter. Cinnamon. Institutional comfort. It made my stomach twist. Room 218 was at the end of the west wing. The door was open. I stood there for a long second, heart pounding, before stepping in. And there she was. Laurel. Older, yes. Her once blonde hair now a pale gray, pulled back in a loose braid. Thin. Paler than I remembered. But unmistakably her. She was sitting by the window reading a book. For a moment I forgot how to breathe. She looked up. Our eyes met. And in that instant, I knew. She recognized me. But she said nothing. Just closed her book slowly and placed it on her lap. I stepped forward. Laurel. A small smile. It's been a long time, Maggie. She said my name like it had never left her mouth. Like it had lived there quietly for all these years. I didn't know what I expected: denial, shock, guilt. But she just looked tired. I sat across from her. My fingers trembled against my purse. You're supposed to be dead, I said, and my voice cracked. She tilted her head. I know. That was it. I know. Silence filled the space between us like fog. I found the letters, I said. She nodded, unsurprised. How long, I asked, though I already knew. Since 91, she replied. We never stopped. Why? My voice was rising now, emotion shaking loose. Why pretend to die? Why lie to me, to everyone? Her eyes dimmed. Because it was the only way I could disappear. I waited. She continued quietly. There was someone. Before Henry. He wasn't safe. I needed to get away. I told Henry everything. He helped me. He didn't want to at first, but he loved me. Enough to let me go. I stared at her. But he didn't let you go. No, she admitted. He didn't. And me? I asked. What was I? The stand-in. The smokescreen. She flinched. You were never just that. I stood. You let me believe you were dead, Laurel. I grieved you. I mourned you like a sister. Tears filled her eyes. I never wanted you to get hurt. I thought, after a while, it would be easier, cleaner. You wrote to my husband for 30 years, I hissed. You remembered anniversaries, recipes, cabin trips. You made a life with him in ink. She didn't argue, and that told me everything. I walked out of that room without another word. The air in the hallway felt colder than when I arrived, and as I reached the parking lot, I realized something terrifying. Laurel hadn't just been alive all this time. She had been living in the cracks of my life, a whisper in the walls, a ghost that wasn't a ghost. I sat in my car and wept, because I didn't know what to do next. Confront Henry, burn the letters, or write one of my own. I remember the night she died, or rather, the night he told me she did. It was a Sunday, early spring. Rain tapped the windows with gentle insistence, the kind that made you want to curl up under a blanket and do nothing. Henry came into the living room, slowly holding the phone like it had just burned him. He looked pale. He said, "It's Laurel." I sat up straight. My stomach turned. I remember the way my heart stopped even before the words left his lips. There was an accident, he said. A car crash. A truck. She died instantly. That was all. No details. No specifics. Just a blanket of grief he wrapped us both in. I cried for her that night. For the girl who had held my hair when I was sick, who had made me laugh until I couldn't breathe, who had whispered dreams to me late into our college nights. I cried for myself for the way we'd drifted in recent years, for never having made that last phone call I kept promising, and I cried for Henry. He sat beside me on the couch holding my hand, saying almost nothing. He didn't cry openly, but I saw it in his eyes, the red-rimmed edges, the distant stare. He said her mother wanted to keep it private. No service. She was cremated. I accepted it. All of it. And why wouldn't I? He was my husband, the man I trusted more than anyone on this earth. But now, every memory of that night feels poisoned, because I know the truth. She wasn't dead. Not then. Not now. He lied. He fabricated her death, helped orchestrate it, perhaps, shielded her, protected her, and used my grief as a smokescreen to maintain it all. I can't stop replaying that night, wondering if he felt anything real, if any of his sorrow was for me, or if it was guilt that his two worlds were about to collide. And I wonder why he chose to stay with me. Because here's the bitter truth, I was never the first choice. I was the safe one, the practical one, the Maggie is steady one. Laurel was fire. I was stone. I gave him stability. She gave him passion. And maybe he thought he could have both. Keep me for the home we built, the dinners we shared, the family we never quite made. Keep her for the whispers in letters, for memories suspended in time, for the youth they never finished living. 30 years of correspondence, 30 years of choosing her in secret while kissing me in the morning. What does that make me? I tried to answer that question the next morning. Henry sat across from me at breakfast, reading the paper as usual. Nothing had changed on his face, nothing to give him away, no crack in his performance. But now I knew to look for it. And I saw it in the smallest ways. The way he lingered on the obituaries page. The way he tapped his spoon 3 times against the side of the bowl, a habit he'd had for years that now seemed coded. A rhythm. A message. To her, I couldn't take it. So I asked, "Do you ever think about Laurel?" He looked up, startled. He set the spoon down gently. "Sometimes," he said. "It's hard not to, isn't it?" I nodded, masking the fury rising in my throat. She was important to both of us. He smiled faintly, but his eyes searched mine. Why do you ask? I shrugged. No reason. Just a dream I had. She felt so real in it. He went still. Then, what kind of dream she was alive? I said softly. Older. Gray hair, but still her. We spoke. She called me Maggie. His jaw tightened. Just a flicker. Almost imperceptible. She said she missed us. I added, watching him closely. A pause. Then a sip of coffee. Dreams can be strange that way. Do you think people ever fake their deaths? I asked too casually. His head snapped up. What? You know. Like in stories. When someone wants to disappear. He laughed. It sounded thin. That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? I smiled. Maybe. I just wonder what someone would have to be running from to do something like that. He stared at me for a long moment, and then he changed the subject. That evening, I went back to the study. This time, not for the letters. I wanted something else. A journal. He's always kept one on and off. Spiral-bound notebooks, sometimes leather-bound gifts I gave him for birthdays. He said they helped him think, and he never let me read them. He said they were boring, but I found one in the back of the filing cabinet behind old receipts and expired warranties. Black cover, worn edges. The first page dated 1991. The first entry she called. She's okay. Her voice trembled. I told her I'd do whatever she needed. She asked if I meant it. I said yes. That was the beginning. The next few entries chronicled the decision to let the world believe Laurel was dead. No details about how they did it. Just emotions, thoughts, guilt, love, regret, resolve. He wrote about how Maggie is too kind to deserve this, but I don't know how to walk away. He wrote about how he wished he could tell both of us the truth. He wrote about the day I held him after Laurel died, and how he almost confessed then, but couldn't. He wrote about how, with each year, the lie became harder to escape. And then something shattered in me when I read this. She asked me to marry her once. Said if I left now, no one would get hurt. But I couldn't. I loved Maggie too. Not in the same way, but enough. Enough to build something real. So I stayed. And wrote. Not in the same way. He loved me, but not the same way. He stayed not because he couldn't live without me, but because it was easier. I closed the journal. For a long time, I just sat there holding it like a weight I hadn't earned, a history I never asked to inherit. And I asked myself the hardest question of all. What if I hadn't found the letters? Would I have lived the rest of my life in that house with that man, never knowing that the center of my world was split between two women, one above ground, one below, and both of us ghosts in our own way? After 30 years together, how did I not notice? How did I live beside a man carrying a ghost into every room? I asked myself that over and over as I folded laundry, as I watered the plants, as I stared at the line of his shoulders while he stood at the sink washing dishes. I had memorized every inch of Henry Linton, the crease above his brow when he concentrated, the way he ran his thumb along the rim of his cup before taking a sip, the slight limp he'd developed after his knee surgery 5 years ago, and still I didn't see it. Not the lie, not the weight of a double life. He carried it so well, with dignity even. And maybe that's what cut deepest. He never looked guilty. He looked devoted. We were the kind of couple people admired. Stable, kind, respected. We never fought in public. We never raised voices. At parties, he would rub my shoulder absent-mindedly, and I would smile at him like I still believed in us. Because I did. Until now. And yet I found myself still playing the part. I still cooked his favorite meals. Still made the bed every morning. Still laughed mechanically at his dry jokes. Because I needed time. Time to decide, was I going to confront him and burn everything down, or would I play the long game? By now, I knew Laurel was real. alive, breathing, sitting in a room at Brightwood Care Center collecting letters from the man I called my husband. But there was one thing I didn't know. Why now? Why had the letters suddenly started showing up in our house again? Why was he keeping them somewhere I could find? He wasn't careless. Henry was many things, but sloppy wasn't one of them. So I tested him. I moved the letter. Just half an inch. Instead of placing it back flush with the stack, I left it slightly out of line. That evening, after his walk, I watched him go into the study. 10 minutes later, he came out. Silent. Not a word about it. But when I checked the drawer again the next morning, the letter was back in place, which meant he noticed, which meant he was waiting for what I decided to push further. The next day, I said, "You know what I was thinking about today?" He glanced up from his book. "What's that Laurel's laugh?" I said. It was so unique, almost like a hiccup. He smiled faintly. "Yes, I remember that. You two really did have something once, didn't you?" He set the book down. "That was a long time ago. But do we ever really leave our first loves behind?" I asked, watching his face. A pause. "Then some part of them always stays." That night I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind. Some part of them always stays. That part lived in our house, in our marriage, in our bed. And I wasn't sure if I could bear it much longer. So I went to Brightwood again. I needed to see her. Not for answers this time, but for truth. Laurel looked weaker than before, paler, her eyes dimmer. When I walked in, she didn't flinch. "You came back," she said softly. I nodded. "You don't look well." She smiled without humor. "I'm not." There was silence between us, a delicate pause. Then she said, "I assume you've read the journal too." "I have." "And you wrote him for 30 years, I said. "But it wasn't the letters that hurt me most." "What was?" she asked. "That you both made a choice to erase me, over and over." She looked away. "It was never about erasing you." "No," I said. "Then what was it?" "Because in 30 years of ink you rarely asked how I was. You talked about meals, weather, his moods, but never me." "I didn't need to ask," she said quietly. "You were the proof." "Of what? That he loved me enough to lie?" I staggered back like she'd slapped me. She winced. "I'm sorry. That came out wrong." "No," I said. "That was the first honest thing you've said." She looked at me, then truly looked. And for the first time I saw her clearly. She wasn't the vibrant young woman I'd buried in memory. She was a dying woman, frail, regretful, and yet, somehow still proud. "I never meant for it to last this long," she said. "The letters were supposed to be goodbye, but they weren't." "No." "Why?" I asked again, voice breaking. "Why keep reaching for him all these years?" She was quiet for a long moment. And then, because he was the only person who ever saw me completely, even when I hated myself. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You had him," I said. "You just didn't want to share him." She nodded slowly. "And will you keep him now?" I looked at her and the answer came without hesitation. "I don't know." That night I sat in the garden behind our house. It was where Henry had first kissed me, where we'd once danced barefoot under string lights, where we'd talked about adopting a child when the doctor said it wasn't likely, and now it was just soil and silence. He found me there an hour later. "Did something happen?" he asked gently. I looked at him. This man I had built a life with, who had laughed with me, built a home with me, grown old beside me. This man who had never stopped loving someone else. "I went to see her," I said. The words dropped like stones. He didn't pretend not to understand. He sank onto the bench beside me, folding his hands. "I know," he whispered. I stared at him. "How long were you going to keep lying?" His eyes filled with something between shame and sorrow. Until she died, he said. And then I would have mourned her, quietly, alone. You would never have known. But I do know, I said. And now, I'll never unknow it. He nodded. I'm sorry. For what I asked. Loving her or lying to me? His silence said both. And that's when I realized he wasn't sorry he had loved her. He was sorry I had found out. The thing about betrayal is it doesn't just break you. It shifts your sense of reality. Suddenly, every memory is up for revision. That trip to Martha's Vineyard where he held my hand under the stars, was he thinking of her? That moment he teared up during our 10-year vow renewal, was it guilt or longing? Even the way he said I love you in the kitchen last Tuesday, was that love meant for me or just muscle memory? That's what betrayal does. It takes the life you thought you were living and peels it back like wallpaper, revealing rot you were never meant to see. I found myself replaying everything, every glance, every pause, every time he said nothing when I needed words or said too much when silence would have sufficed. The man I loved was becoming a stranger. But worse still, I didn't even know if the stranger had ever been real. I started keeping my own journal. I needed a place to put the chaos. I wrote March 2nd. I watched him tie his shoes and wondered how many letters he's hidden from me, how many lies are buried under our floorboards. March 4th. He asked if I wanted tea. I said yes. I said it like a woman who doesn't know what else to say. March 6th. He smiled in his sleep. I hope it was for me. I know it wasn't. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Not yet. Not without blowing up our entire world. So I did what women like me have done for generations. I endured. I planned. I observed. But beneath all of that, I felt something else rising. Anger. Sharp. Focused. Cold. It wasn't just the betrayal that enraged me, it was the audacity. The arrogance of thinking I could live with this truth and continue as if nothing had changed. The assumption that I would swallow it all, his loyalty to Laurel, his emotional infidelity, and remain grateful for the scraps of affection he threw my way. He had built a kingdom of lies, and I had dusted its windows, but not anymore. The turning point came on a Sunday. He was in the garden pruning roses. I stood at the window watching him. The sun lit his shoulders. He hummed again, always humming. The same low tune, one I had thought of as his signature comfort sound. And suddenly I remembered something from Laurel's letters. He still hums our song even when he's thinking. I know it means he's remembering me. That was the moment. The sound I'd found soothing for decades. It wasn't mine. It was hers. That tune wasn't a habit. It was a shrine. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the bedroom like a caged animal. Henry was downstairs sipping tea and reading. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at our wedding photo on the nightstand. We looked so young, so sure. I wanted to reach into the photo and warn that version of me. Tell her he loves you, but he'll never only love you. By midnight, I'd made a decision. The next day, I drove to Brightwood. Again. Not to scream, not to rage, but to understand. If I was ever going to reclaim my life, I had to look her in the eye one last time and close the door myself. She looked weaker than ever. A nurse helped her into a chair by the window. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. "You came again," she said. I nodded. "Don't worry, it's the last time." She studied my face. "You look tired." "I am." She nodded. "So am I." We sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that isn't empty. The kind that's packed with things too heavy to say. Finally, I asked, "What do you think he would have done if I hadn't found the letters?" She didn't hesitate. "He would have stayed with you. Until the end. And written to you in secret, yes." I exhaled sharply. "So I was plan A. You were plan B." "No," she said gently. We were both plan A, in different timelines. I don't believe in timelines, I said. I believe in choices. And he made his. She didn't argue. I stood. I'm going to leave him, I said, surprising even myself. Laurel's eyes widened. Are you sure? I nodded. Not today. Maybe not this week. But I will. Because I refuse to be a footnote in my own life. She closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. I loved you too, Maggie, she said. But I was already gone. When I got home, Henry was in the kitchen. He looked up from his newspaper. Good walk. I looked at the man I had spent more than half my life with, the man who had held my hand through surgeries and funerals, the man who had cooked me eggs every Sunday since 1997, and I smiled. Very. Because now I wasn't just enduring, I was deciding, and every decision from that moment forward would be mine. I started clearing drawers, quietly, deliberately. Each folded shirt felt like peeling away the layers of my old self, the Maggie who believed in everything Henry said, the Maggie who thought loyalty meant swallowing silence, the Maggie who lived in a house built on letters meant for someone else. I didn't pack like a woman running away. I packed like a woman returning to herself. I didn't know where I was going yet. A hotel. Maybe a rented cottage by the coast. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the decision was mine. I even kept a list in my journal. Sweater drawer. Keep gray cardigan, donate blue one. He always said it made me look washed out. I liked it. Jewelry box, take my mother's locket, leave the pearl earrings, he gave them to me the year she died. Bookshelf, take Plath Morrison and the poetry Laurel never read. Each item was a choice, a symbol, a way of saying, this is mine, this is not. I didn't want revenge. Not exactly. What I wanted was space. Space to breathe without his hum in the background. Space to cry without wondering if the tears were being measured against hers. But most of all, I wanted to reclaim the parts of myself that I had handed over in small, quiet moments, one apology at a time. On the 5th day of packing, he noticed. I was folding clothes at the foot of the bed when he walked in. His gaze fell on the open suitcase. He didn't say anything at first. Then, are you going somewhere? I looked up. Yes. For how long, I don't know. His jaw tightened. Maggie. I held up a hand. Please don't. He sat down on the edge of the bed like he suddenly couldn't hold his own weight. I never wanted to hurt you, he said. But you did. He nodded. I know. I mourned her, I said. You let me. I mourned her too. In a different way. You mourned the life you didn't get to live, I snapped. While building a lie you let me carry. He was quiet. Then I loved you. Past tense. No, he said. Always. And that was the tragedy, wasn't it? That both things could be true. He did love me, but not only me. That night I slept in the guest room. The bed was too firm. The sheets unfamiliar. But for the first time in weeks, I fell asleep without clutching my stomach like something might spill out of me. Because this pain wasn't confusion anymore. It was clarity. And clarity, I was learning, could be a kind of relief. The next morning, I left a note on the kitchen table. Henry, I need space. Not because I hate you, but because I can't unknow what I now know. I need to figure out who I am without the weight of your secrets. I'm not running. I'm reclaiming. Maggie. I didn't wait to see if he read it. I walked out the front door with my suitcase and journal, closed it behind me, and didn't look back. Not that day. Not yet. I rented a small cottage an hour away. Wooden floors, a porch swing, the smell of lavender through the windows. I drank coffee in silence, watched the sky change colors, started painting again badly but freely, and I wrote. God, did I write? I filled pages with everything I couldn't say to Henry, letters I'd never send, truths I hadn't dared whisper, memories I wanted to preserve before the bitterness erased even the good. After 2 weeks, a letter came. Handwritten. From him. Just one page. No excuses. No justifications. Just this: I understand why you left. I don't know how to ask for forgiveness because I'm not sure I deserve it. But I want you to know, if you come back, I will spend whatever time we have left being fully here. Only here. If you don't, I will love you quietly. Always. H. I didn't cry when I read it. I didn't rage. I just folded it neatly and placed it in the back of my journal. Because now the choice was mine. And for the first time in 3 decades, that felt enough. I didn't go back. Not right away. I needed to know what my life looked like without him in it. Not as an absence, but as a possibility. It's strange how quickly the body adapts to new patterns. You stop setting 2 plates. You learn which side of the bed feels less lonely. You forget the hum of someone else's breathing in the room. Slowly, the silence stops echoing. And then something even stranger happens: you start filling the space with your own sound. I woke up each morning with my own rhythm, not dictated by his steps, not measured against his moods. I read for hours without interruption. I walked barefoot into the garden without thinking about when I needed to return. I burned a meal and laughed instead of apologizing. I danced once alone with music too loud, and I didn't feel foolish. For the first time in years, I was living without audience, without performance, without the weight of needing to be chosen daily by someone who had always split that choosing in half. And it felt good. 3 weeks after I left, my sister called. She said Henry had come by to drop off a photo album. I'd forgotten, the one from our trip to Florence, the one I'd begged him to find for months. She said he looked thinner, tired, but kind. He said he didn't want to intrude, just wanted to return what mattered. I thanked her and changed the subject. But that night I pulled out my journal and wrote, "He remembers the things that matter, even now." Is that cruelty or care, or both? The answer never came. A few days later, I went into town and found myself walking past a bookstore. I hadn't meant to stop, but a cover in the window caught my eye. Letters we never sent. I stepped inside. The woman behind the counter greeted me with a soft smile. Looking for anything, I held up the book. "Maybe just this." She nodded. "Good choice. It's about 2 women writing to the same man, never knowing the other exists." I froze. She must have seen something flicker in my face. "Bit intense," she said gently, "but honest." I bought it and read it in one sitting. Not because it mirrored my story, it didn't. Not exactly. But because it made me realize something I hadn't let myself feel. Compassion. For Laurel. And for Henry. Not forgiveness, that was still far, but understanding. They were human. They made a selfish, painful, entangled choice. But so had I. I had chosen silence too. I had ignored red flags. I had built comfort around ambiguity. And now I was suffering not only because of their choices, but because of my refusal to ask hard questions when I had the chance. So maybe this wasn't just about betrayal. Maybe it was about waking up. That night I went through the letters again. Not all of them. Just a few. Ones that felt benign. There was one where Laurel wrote, "She's strong, Henry. Stronger than me. Don't underestimate her ability to love and forgive." And another much later, "You made your choice. Now live in it. Love her like she's the only one who matters, because in the life you've chosen, she is." For the first time, I believe those words were sincere. Not noble, not clean, but real. And I asked myself, was it possible to move forward while holding pain honestly? Could love, broken, complicated love, survive acknowledgement? I spent the next few days doing nothing but thinking. No phone, no books, no lists. Just sitting on the porch watching the wind turn through the lavender bushes, listening to the creaks of the cottage. I thought about what my life could be. Alone, free, peaceful, but also a little lonely. Then I thought about going back. Not to be his wife the way I had been, but to see what a new version of that might look like. One with boundaries, with space, with no more shadows. On the 33rd day, I got in the car and drove home. I didn't call, didn't warn him, just pulled into the driveway and sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at the house that held both my deepest joys and my quietest wounds. He opened the front door before I even reached the steps. He didn't smile, didn't move, just waited. I stopped 3 feet from him. "I'm not here to forget," I said. "I wouldn't ask you to. I may never forgive you. I'll wait anyway. I'm not the same woman I was when I left. I know. And you don't get to be the same man." He nodded. Then he stepped aside and let me in. Not into the house, but into the possibility of something else. Something raw. Something honest. Maybe even something new. Rebuilding a life doesn't start with forgiveness. It starts with truth. And truth, in our case, meant starting over in the same place, but with different eyes. We didn't hug that first night. Didn't fall into each other's arms like some storybook reunion. We simply coexisted, two people in the same house orbiting one another like unfamiliar planets. I slept in the guest room. He didn't ask when or if I'd return to our bed. There were no demands, no explanations, just presence. He made coffee the next morning, left a cup for me by the window seat. No note, no smiley face, just the cup, warm, full, waiting. And something in that small act told me he understood this wasn't about grand gestures. This was about constancy. The kind of steady that can't be faked. The kind he'd reserved for Laurel all those years in silence. Now he was offering it to me in daylight. We started talking in fragments. A word here, a question there. How was the cottage quiet? You paint again? A little. One night, 3 days in, I said, "What was the last thing she wrote to you?" He looked up from his book. He didn't hesitate. "She told me not to contact her again. That I needed to give you everything now. All of me." I believed him. For the first time in weeks, I truly believed him. "And do you?" I asked. His voice cracked. "I'm trying." I nodded. "Good." He offered to move out. Said he'd give me the house. Said he'd understand. But I said no. Not because I was ready to be us again, but because this was still my life too. And I wouldn't be the one erased. Not anymore. We made new rules, clear ones. No more secrets. No more unsaid things. If he was sad, he had to say it. If I was angry, I could scream. If we ever felt the old patterns creeping back in the silence, the pretending we had to stop. Name it. Choose differently. We even wrote them down. Like vows, but real. Messy. Mortal. And then one morning, I handed him a letter. Not handwritten. Typed. Just like his had been. It read, "I don't know if I still love you the same way, but I do know that when I imagine my life moving forward, I don't want it to be haunted anymore. If we're going to try this, really try, it has to be with open eyes. And you need to accept that I will carry this with me. Always." He folded the letter gently, pressed it to his chest, said thank you. That was all. But it felt like enough. We didn't erase Laurel. We spoke about her now. Sometimes with grief. Sometimes with warmth. Sometimes with fury. I even asked to read a few of his letters, the ones he'd sent her. Not because I wanted to punish myself, but because I needed to understand the part of him that I'd never known and now had a right to. His words to her were poetic, careful, full of longing. But there was something else there, too. A kind of ache that never found rest. One letter struck me the hardest. "You were my echo. Maggie is my anchor. I love you in silence. I love her out loud. I don't know what kind of man that makes me, only that I never stopped loving either of you." I cried when I read it. Not because it hurt, but because it helped me release the part of myself that had been screaming to be the only one. A month after I returned, we went to Laurel's grave together. Yes, grave. She passed 2 weeks after I visited her. Complications. Peaceful, the nurse said. She was buried under a maple tree. No large headstone, just a flat bronze plaque that read, Laurel May Henderson, beloved friend, artist, storyteller. He didn't cry at first, just stood there, hands in his pockets, mouth tight. I knelt and placed a small rock on her grave. It felt right. Jewish tradition, maybe, or maybe just a gesture of respect. When I looked up, he was crying. Not loudly, but wholly. And I let him. Because grief, I've learned, is a kind of love that doesn't know where to go. And he had a lot of it. Later that evening, we sat on the porch in silence. He took my hand. I didn't pull away. He said, I don't deserve a second chance. I replied, maybe not. He nodded. And then, but maybe we both deserve a new beginning. Healing isn't clean. It's jagged, slow, and humiliating. But sometimes, on the other side of humiliation, there's peace. At least that's what I kept telling myself every time I flinched at his touch. Every time I remembered him licking an envelope meant for her. Every time I walked past the drawer where the letters once sat. Some days were easier than others. Some days he made me laugh. Not in that polite social way. A real laugh. The kind that cracked something open. Other days I looked at him and saw a stranger. The man who let me grieve a living woman, let me cling to a marriage half-rooted in fiction. But healing, I realized, wasn't about pretending those moments didn't happen. It was about surviving them. And not alone. We started doing small things together again. Grocery shopping, walking around the neighborhood after dinner, playing cards like we used to before life got heavy. We even went to a pottery class one Saturday morning. Just the two of us. Surrounded by younger couples and wet clay and awkward silence. He made a mug. I made a bowl. Both were lopsided. Still, we brought them home like trophies. Small proof that something new could be built from unsteady hands. One night, about a month after I'd come back, I found him in the study. He was reading. The chair creaked as he shifted. I stood in the doorway holding my tea and asked, "Do you think we'll ever be the same?" He looked up slowly. No. That should have hurt. But it didn't. Good, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Because the same wasn't honest, I added. And I want honest now. Even if it's quieter. Even if it's smaller. He smiled faintly but real. So do I. And just like that, something unspoken settled between us. We weren't rebuilding the past. We were building forward. On new ground. We had to because the old ground was gone, scorched by time's secrets, and a grief neither of us fully understood until it consumed us. He told me once, not long after, that I don't think I ever really knew what kind of man I was until you found the letters. I asked him what he meant. I thought I was loyal, he said. Because I stayed. Because I provided. But loyalty isn't just staying. What is it then? It's showing up. Fully. Even when it's hard. Especially then. I nodded. Because that, I understood now, was the only kind of love I could accept anymore. Love without hiding. I started writing again. Not just journaling, really writing. Short essays, memory pieces, fragments of conversations. I submitted one to a local magazine. They published it. A piece about trust and deception told through the metaphor of pruning a garden. I didn't mention names, but he read it. He looked up afterward and said, "You made me the thorn bush." Did I? He smiled. And the hands that tended it. I smiled back. Months passed. Spring melted into summer. We hosted our first dinner again. Just 4 close friends. No one asked where I'd been, but they looked at us differently, like they could feel something had shifted, and we didn't hide it. He'd glance at me across the table like a man still trying to win something. I let him, not because I owed it, but because part of me still wanted to. And maybe that was the most honest thing yet. There's a moment when you've lived through betrayal where you realize the only person who can decide your future is you. Not the one who broke you. Not the one who apologized. Not even the one who waited. You. And once I claimed that truth, I stopped looking at Henry through the lens of what he'd done. I started looking at him through the lens of who I wanted to be. Free. Still fractured. But free. Laurel was gone, but her absence still had weight. Grief, I've learned, doesn't end with a death. Sometimes it deepens. It becomes layered grief for what was grief, for what never had the chance to be, and grief for the version of yourself that will never return. I didn't miss Laurel. That would be a lie, but I did feel her everywhere, in the way Henry stirred his tea, in the quiet space between words when a memory brushed past and neither of us dared to say it out loud, in the silence after a song she once mentioned in her letters played on the radio. We lived with her ghost not haunting us maliciously, but present like a third pulse between our footsteps. And somehow acknowledging her became part of our healing. One morning, I placed her final letter on the kitchen table. It was the only one I'd never opened. It had arrived after her death, one of those delays in mail forwarding. The handwriting was still perfect, as if her hand hadn't known she was dying. I slid it toward Henry. I think we should read this. Together. He hesitated, his fingers resting lightly on the envelope, then nodded. We sat side by side as he opened it with careful hands. He unfolded the paper, cleared his throat, and began. Dear both of you, if this letter finds you after I'm gone, then I suppose I'll say it plain. I never meant for this story to stretch so long. I loved him. I always did. But I also loved what you and he had, Maggie, the kind of love I could never quite touch. I resented it, yes. But I also respected it. If there's one thing I hope, it's that my part in your story doesn't ruin the rest of it. People like us, we get few chances to start over. So take yours. Take it boldly. With complicated love, Laurel. We didn't say anything after. We didn't have to. The letter sat between us like a closed chapter. Not erased, not forgiven, but folded and put away. That evening, I lit a candle in the garden. No prayers, no ceremony, just flame. It flickered in the breeze and reminded me that everything ends. Even grief, even longing, even the version of myself that once needed someone else to define her. I watched it burn for an hour. Then I went inside. Something changed in our home after that. It wasn't louder or softer. It was lighter. Like we'd finally exhaled. We painted the study, the one that held the drawer where the letters once lived. Pale green. I picked it. We replaced the couch we never liked. Bought a rug, we both did. Little things, but symbolic. Proof that we were building something new, not just rearranging the ruins. We even traveled, just for a weekend, to a small lakeside town 3 hours away. We rented a tiny cabin, cooked simple meals, took a canoe out on still waters. He watched me read on the porch swing and said, "You look different." "Do I? You seem untouched by ghosts." I closed the book. That's because I finally made peace with the fact that they were real, and that they're gone. That night we sat under the stars. He reached for my hand slower than he used to, more reverent, more aware of the woman beside him, not as his wife, not as someone waiting to be forgiven, but as a whole person with her own story, her own choices. I let him take it. We didn't talk about the past. Not because we'd forgotten, but because some chapters once truly closed don't need to be read aloud again. The world didn't notice we had changed. But I did. And that was enough. Friends still came over and complimented our garden. Neighbors waved and commented on how good we looked. The cashier at the market still asked if we wanted the usual. From the outside, nothing seemed different. But inside, everything was quieter, not silent, not withdrawn, just settled. As if all the furniture of our emotional lives had finally been placed in the right rooms. We didn't speak of Laurel anymore. Not because it was forbidden. Because it no longer ruled the space between us. She had become a part of our story, not the shadow, not the secret, just a chapter we'd outlived. We didn't owe her silence, but we also didn't owe her the rest of our years. One afternoon, I cleaned out the last drawer of the guest room. It had become cluttered with remnants of my time away, an old scarf, 3 dried-up pens, a notebook filled with late-night fears and half-thought revenge fantasies. I flipped through its pages, so much rage, so much grief, so many questions that no longer needed answers. I hesitated only once before sliding it into the bin. It wasn't denial. It was release. That Maggie, the version of me who cried with her hand over her mouth, who slept next to a man holding a secret life she deserved peace too. And she had finally gotten it. I had begun volunteering at the library again, not full-time. Just enough to stay tethered to something that wasn't memory. Every Tuesday afternoon, I led a memoir writing group. Women mostly. Retired, widowed. A few with eyes that had seen more than they ever spoke about. We wrote letters to our younger selves. We shared stories about the moments that made us. One day, a woman named Ellen, sharp-eyed, soft-voiced, read her piece aloud. It ended with the words, "Sometimes survival doesn't look like strength. Sometimes it looks like staying anyway." And just like that, I knew exactly what my own story had been. Not triumph, not revenge. Staying anyway. But on my own terms now. Henry and I found new things to talk about. We didn't just relive the past we dreamed again. We spoke about maybe moving to the coast in a few years, starting a small garden, getting a dog. We disagreed on the breed. We rewatched old movies and disagreed about endings we used to agree on. We began again not from scratch, but from truth. And I began to realize something I'd never dared admit out loud. I was happy. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in the way you feel when your feet are warm under a blanket, and you can hear the hum of someone making tea in the next room, and you know, for once, they're not hiding anything. I no longer needed Henry to atone every day. That's how I knew I had healed. Because his guilt had stopped being the weight I needed him to carry just so I could breathe. Instead, we both carried our part of the story, without blame, without performance, just memory and mercy. One morning, he surprised me with breakfast in bed. Nothing fancy, just toast eggs, black coffee. There was a folded napkin beside the plate. On it, in his unmistakable print, just 3 words. "Thank you anyway." I looked at him. He smiled, sheepish. I said nothing. But I placed my hand on his. Because in that moment I understood what he meant. He knew he hadn't earned me back. But he was grateful I was still here. And that gratitude, soft, honest, undesperate, was all I needed. Time passed. The seasons turned. But one morning a letter came again, this time addressed to me. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Shaky, uncertain. Like someone wasn't sure if they should even be writing. It was early April. I remember because the daffodils had just bloomed in the front yard, and the light through the kitchen window had that thin gold quality I loved. I stood at the counter, the envelope in my hand, staring at my name written in cursive. Not Mrs. Henderson, not Maggie and Henry, just me. I opened it slowly. The first line stopped me cold. "Dear Maggie, you don't know me, but I knew Laurel." I sat down. Heart thudding. The letter came from a woman named Janice, Laurel's neighbor and friend during her final years. She explained that Laurel had shared stories, regrets, fragments of a love she couldn't fully let go of, and apparently, stories about me too. She spoke of you with awe, Janice had written. She said you were the kind of woman who made silence feel like dignity. She feared you but respected you. And near the end, she wondered often if she'd broken something too fragile to fix. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. The woman I'd resented, feared, loathed in private moments. She'd thought of me, maybe not with envy, but with recognition, and maybe just, maybe, remorse. Janice went on. After Laurel passed, I found a small wooden box among her belongings. It had no lock. Just a note, for Maggie if she ever asks. I wasn't sure what to do with it, but then the obituary mentioned Henry's name, and yours. So I found this address. The box is yours if you want it. Let me know. J. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it and slid it into the drawer beside the stove. For 3 days, I didn't mention it to Henry. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't know what I wanted yet. Curiosity, closure, or just distance. On the 4th day, I told him. We were sitting in the garden. I handed him the letter and waited. He read it quietly, didn't react, didn't even blink. Then, "Do you want the box? I don't know," I said honestly. "Do you want me to say no?" "No." "Then I'll support whatever you decide." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him without needing proof. I wrote to Janice that night. Simple. Thank you. I'll come for it. Maggie. She replied 2 days later, gave me the address, said she'd be home all afternoon. So I drove alone back through winding roads and unfamiliar towns until I found myself in front of a pale yellow house with ivy climbing the side. Janice was kind, soft-spoken, older than I expected. She led me to the porch and placed the box in my hands like it was a sacred thing. Then she said, "She wanted you to have peace. She just didn't know how to give it to you." I nodded, said thank you, then left. I didn't open the box until that evening, alone, in our living room. Henry was at the market. The air was quiet, the light dim. Inside the box were only a few things. A photographed the 3 of us at a gallery opening. Me in the center, Laurel in profile, Henry's hand on my shoulder. A short letter addressed to the woman who got the life I couldn't ask for. A ring, small, simple, not a wedding ring, just a silver band, engraved with a single word enough. I unfolded the letter last. Maggie, if you're reading this, then I've gone. I won't ask forgiveness. I won't pretend to deserve it. But I will say this. Loving Henry never made me hate you. But envying you, that was harder to resist. You had the courage to build something whole. I only ever knew how to borrow pieces. I leave you this not to reopen the wound, but to offer a small truth. In another life, I might have asked to be your friend. In this one, I hope you find peace that doesn't require forgetting me. Laurel, I cried. Not loud, not broken, just full. Like something heavy had finally passed through me and left something tender in its place. When Henry returned, he found me sitting beside the box. I looked up at him and said, "She gave me back my story." He nodded, didn't ask questions, didn't need to. He just sat beside me, and together we watched the shadows stretch across the floor, long and soft, like memory fading gently instead of tearing. What do you do when the story ends, but the echo remains? That was the question I asked myself in the weeks after Laurel's box arrived. I didn't wear the ring. I didn't burn the letter. I didn't place the photo on display, but I kept them. Tucked inside the drawer where I used to hide the things I didn't want to face. Now it held the opposite, not secrets, but truths. Small, sharp, and unchangeable. I began walking every morning, just before sunrise when the world was still quiet and the fog held everything in a soft hush. It became my ritual, a way of reminding myself that the present existed, that the day was mine before anyone could take it. One morning, Henry joined me. He didn't say much, just kept pace beside me, our breaths visible in the cold air, our silence finally warm rather than weighted. At the top of the hill near our neighborhood, we stopped. The sun was just cresting, staining the sky with streaks of orange and violet. I turned to him and said, "Do you think she found peace?" He didn't answer right away. Then I think she made peace with us, with herself, in the only way she knew how. And what about us? He looked at me, really looked. We're still making it. We didn't celebrate anniversaries that year. Not with gifts. Not with champagne. But on the day we were married all those years ago, he handed me a blank journal. No inscription. No note. Just the weight of it in my hands and the quiet invitation it held. I understood. It was my story now. Not ours. Not his. Mine. To fill with whatever came next. Sometimes people ask me how we survived it all. How I forgave. How I stayed. And the truth is, I didn't forgive in the way they mean. I didn't erase what happened. I didn't minimize the betrayal or the ache of those letters. But I did choose to stop bleeding from the same wound. I chose to close it stitch by slow stitch with my own hands. I stayed not because he needed me, but because I realized I didn't need to run to be free. I was already free. And freedom, it turns out, doesn't always look like escape. Sometimes it looks like staying, but on your own terms. It's been 2 years now. The box still lives in the drawer. We never reopened it. We didn't need to. Some stories don't need retelling to be remembered. They just need to be accepted. If you're listening to this wondering whether love can survive betrayal, I won't give you a tidy answer. But I will tell you this. Love that survives is not the same love. It's weathered, wiser, sometimes smaller, but often more real, because it knows what it almost lost. And it shows up anyway, every day, without guarantee, without perfection, just presence. And that's enough. Enough for me, enough for now. Maybe even enough for always. So tell me, have you ever had to start over from within the same story? Have you ever rebuilt a life on top of what once broke you? I want to hear your truth. Leave your story in the comments.